Joanna Macy, the great environmental activist and systems ecologist, said that when faced with planetary crisis, there are three stories we can tell ourselves. Business as usual, in which we tell ourselves that some degree of damage is necessary for human progress. The great unraveling, in which we tell ourselves that mass ecosystem destruction is inevitable. And the great turning, in which we tell ourselves that evolving the way we live is the only way forward, and that we're at the beginning of one of the great projects in human history. On this podcast, we talk to people who are writing that third story, with their own work and their own lives. Mission-driven leaders who are dedicated to social and environmental impact at this critical moment for our species. Welcome to The Turning Point. So starting with a little story today, Ian. 2 years ago, I was out for a walk with our mutual friend from the University of Minnesota, Megan Voorhees, and she was asking about how work was going, and I was telling her, well, I've been feeling called pretty strongly the last few years to do something to help restore the relationship between humanity and the earth, right? Restoring some of that ancient wisdom of that relationship of reciprocity or stewardship. And I'm feeling really called to this, but at the same time, I'm looking around and I don't know how that's going to work. I'm thinking all of my reference points are ancient, but when I look at the modern world, I don't see how we can reapply that wisdom in the modern context. Economies are so complex. The world is so interwoven. I said, I don't see models for how to do this, which I'm sure a lot of people can identify with. And she just looks at me and says, do you know Kinari Webb? And I, of course, said no. And so it was around the time of my birthday. So she sent me a copy of Kinari Webb's book, Guardians of the Trees. And you've read it now. You know how inspirational that story is and how impactful her story is. What was your reaction to reading that book?
The founder of permaculture, Bill Mollison, once said something to the effect of, though the challenges that we face are more and more complex every day, the solutions remain embarrassingly simple. And Kinari's story and that of Health and Harmony, this environmental nonprofit that she founded, I think is such a beautiful illustration of exactly that point. And the environmental work that this organization is doing and has done is amazing. But the way that it came about was through the act of simplicity, right? Just listening and letting the solutions reveal themselves. It's an amazing story. She's an amazing woman. I'm super excited for this episode.
Yeah, and to tee up this episode effectively, Health and Harmony is an organization that's involved primarily in rainforest preservation, a huge challenge that dozens, if not hundreds of organizations have attempted to tackle in some way. But her story is unique because she came to it as an undergraduate studying orangutans in Borneo in their national rainforest. And when she heard the sound of logging and she heard chainsaws, she started asking why. And what she ultimately discovered was that local communities who bordered the rainforest were having to log to pay for acute medical expenses. And so this woman went to medical school back in the United States and started building an organization that could solve the actual problem that was at the root of why the logging was happening. And this organization, Health and Harmony, has now grown to be a global organization, and they do interventions like this in Indonesia, in Madagascar, in Brazil, where they get very close to these communities that border the forest and basically ask them, what do you need to thrive and coexist successfully with the rainforest on which you live? And that is, like you said, a seemingly simple question. But of course, in the modern world, that took years of work, and her story is incredible, and Health and Harmony as an organization is equally incredible. And I'm just looking forward to sharing this story with everyone and for everyone to get a chance to meet Kinari Webb.
It was an enlightening conversation, and I think it'll be particularly invigorating for those out there who are maybe a little disillusioned by the sheen that comes with climate tech, right? Technology is what's going to save the climate crisis. You know, if there's technology at play in Health and Harmony, certainly there is, you know, from a literal level, but the technology at play here to me feels like heart-to-heart conversations. It's a human-first technology, and you know, as she tells the story in and of itself, the work that they're doing is far more impactful at far less cost because of the way that they're doing it. So if there's anybody out there who's a little tired or disillusioned by the whole climate tech movement and the fact that we're going to innovate our way out of this problem when at the root it is an issue of the way that we are in relationship with the land, this is a beautiful story that will hopefully offer up some soothing balm.
Yeah, and I think that's enough build up from us. Let's let that soothing balm have its own space. Without further ado, you can hear our conversation now with Dr. Kinari Webb. All right, Kinari Webb, welcome to The Turning Point.
Thank you so much. It's a delight to be here.
Thanks for coming.
Yep, super excited to have you. So, in the preface of your book, the first page of Guardians of the Trees, you open with the story of nearly going over a cliff on horseback as a teenager. Is that right?
Yep.
Yeah, one of multiple near-death experiences covered in your book. But I was hoping you could share a little bit of that story and how it specifically relates to the planetary cliff that we are approaching.
Yeah, I decided to open with that story because that's what it feels like to me, right? I mean, this was an experience I had in childhood, but it just feels like we are headed straight for a cliff, and we are like on a runaway horse, one of those horses that you cannot stop no matter what you do, which is what I was trying to do, stop him. But I also just feel like here we are in this moment where we have to think creatively and we have to resource everything we can possibly learn, and that is what I did in that moment. And I remembered that I had read once that a horse cannot run with something hanging from its neck. So I swung both legs over to the side of the saddle, grabbed the pommel, and swung myself down underneath this horse at full gallop. And Pinto slid to a stop right before the edge of the cliff.
The horse's name was Pinto?
Yeah.
That's perfect. As someone who had spent an embarrassingly little amount of time on a horse, and has had one severe injury falling off a horse, I can only imagine the level of riding that would require to be able to swing around to the bottom side of the horse's neck at full gallop.
Well, it worked, but I wouldn't recommend it. And it might have taken the stupidity of youth when you didn't think you were actually going to die, but you were trying to avoid death, which... Well, here we are. We are in the stupidity of youth, hopefully. The youthfulness of the planet. The moment where we are acting like we can't possibly die. And yet we see the cliff. So what can we do to actually stop it? What can we do so that we change life so that it is about thriving? You know, it's like an idea of scarcity, that there is not enough for all of us to thrive, and that we have to fight over the little that there is. That's just actually not true. And an Indigenous perspective is very much one that if we treat the earth with respect, and we treat each other with love and respect, there's enough for all of us to thrive. And in fact, it is only in that reciprocity with nature and with each other that thriving is possible. And so that's what I do with my life, working on that. And I have been blessed to see that it is possible, that a totally different way of being is right there. We can do it.
Well, I'm hoping, and coming from two people who also are working very hard in that direction, but I would say, I'll speak for myself, often wrestle with the idea of how possible it is. I'm hoping you're going to spend the rest of this podcast convincing us it is possible.
Yeah, I will. And I will tell you, I've wrestled with it myself too, right? Because it's not how we're raised. We're raised in a belief of scarcity, but that's not fundamental truth.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what you have been doing. Some people listening to this may not have heard of Health and Harmony, and they may not be familiar with specifically the role that tropical forests play in this relationship of reciprocity with the earth. So can we start there? Just talking about the planetary role of tropical forests, especially for those of us in North America who don't see tropical forests without traveling.
Yeah. I really do think of the earth as a being, right? Like kind of as a body. I'm a doctor, but I recognize that each part of the body, we've got all these bacteria, we've got all heart, lungs, we've got, all of it is necessary for thriving. But I will also say as a doctor that some parts of the body are more important than others. For thriving, we need all the parts. But, you can survive without a limb, but not without a heart or lungs. And on the earth, the rainforests of the earth are the heart and lungs of the earth. They are just 2% of the surface of the earth, but they contain 50% of the world's species. They are called the heart because they pump water, rain all over the planet. And they're considered the lungs because they are releasing all of this oxygen and absorbing all of this CO2, which is super important for cooling the planet. Also, they create rain. They create the clouds that create the rain, and the clouds also help cool the planet. So in many different ways, they're just absolutely essential. If we don't have our heart and lungs, we don't make it anywhere on the planet. And so the people who are the guardians of those forests, mostly indigenous and local communities, they they are giving something so important and so valuable to the planet. And they deserve actually some reciprocity in return. Oh, maybe I'll just tell the story of how I first came to this, which was that I was studying orangutans in the rainforest in Borneo, and I could hear the chainsaws all around me. And it turned out it was many of the local communities who were logging the forest. And I was like, what is wrong with these people? Don't they know how important the forest is? But they absolutely knew, and they called the forest their mother. But they were often in these horrible catch-22s, which is because of a long history of colonization, etc., right? Where they didn't have access to even the most basic things like healthcare. And that required often long travel and extreme expense, more than an entire year's income. And one of the only ways to get that much money was to log the forest, which they fully understood was absolutely essential for their future well-being and the future well-being of the planet. So I ended up going to medical school and working with local communities in Indonesia first. We now work around the world, but to ask them, what are the solutions? And the solution, and how can the world send some gratitude to you all so that you truly can protect the forest and so that you can thrive? And what they showed us was that with a little bit of gratitude, not take that much money, communities could incredibly thrive. They could protect the forest. Tens of thousands of acres of rainforest could grow back. It's really exquisite to watch that. We have this belief that you have to choose between human and environmental well-being, but it's actually the opposite. When both thrive, everyone thrives.
Yeah. Kinari, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the importance of biodiversity. And the reason that I would like to pause here for a moment is because, you mentioned indigenous wisdom, right? And often at the core, in my understanding, is this notion of interdependence. And I think in the West, we have, when we talk about climate or climate change, the conversation is largely around drawdown and carbon, which feels like the tiniest sliver of an entire pie, and it really oversimplifies the conversation, I think, to an unhealthy extent. So could you share just a little bit about, maybe for those of us listeners who are in urban areas or don't have, the experience of living in deep nature or wilderness experiences, like what is actually the importance of biodiversity versus just the importance of drawdown?
Yeah, it's so hard to even begin to talk about this because, as you say, it is all interconnected, right? There's all this interesting research that shows that the more large mammals you have, like orangutans or elephants, they actually increase the carbon storage of the forest because they sort of move the forest towards the bigger trees. The elephants take down the smaller trees, the orangutans, break down the branches to make these nests. Those are just some of the many, many ways that the forest, the biodiversity is inseparable from the benefits of the forest in terms of water cycling, carbon. I think it is a real problem, and I see it in medicine too, right? There's the doctor who focuses on your heart, and there's the doctor who focuses on your liver, and then there the twain shall meet, although they're fully connected, and actually the medicines that one's giving you affects the other. It's this ridiculousness of dividing everything into these ever smaller parts without understanding that the whole is so much greater than the sum of the parts. And I would say that that's not just the biodiversity, and it's not just the animals, right? It's the fungi, and it's the viruses and the bacteria and everything, right? It all goes together. It's also the communities. They are inseparable from the forest, right? And the justice of how they are doing and how the world, sends them reciprocity or not is also inseparable.
Yeah, you mentioned indigenous traditions, Ian, and those who are still connected to the land and still carry some of that wisdom, are often reminding us that we also co-evolved with the land and with the animals, even though we're the younger siblings of this whole process, right? We're the most recent additions to the ecosystem, but we too are intended to be stewards, and we have a role to play within the full cycle of life and the thriving of forest biomes or grassland biomes, etc.
We are essential for the forest thriving. And the forest is essential for our thriving. It is inseparable. Yeah.
Yes, inseparable. And obviously one of the great things about your book and your whole story, Guardians of the Trees, was demonstrating that in a modern context and how, right, like you said, it isn't humans versus forest. It is humans reestablishing the right relationship with the forest, and how health and harmony is helping to basically mend some of those broken links in that relationship.
And the way we do it is to what we call radical listening, right? Which is just to sit down with circles in community and just ask, what would you all need? It's gratitude from the world so that you can thrive and the forest can thrive. And because they don't see things as separate, they'll say, well, we need access to healthcare, we need like organic farming training, we need this, like that's how you protect the forest, because they're all one, right? And sometimes it takes 5 or 10 years of implementing a solution before I, as an outsider, would begin to understand all of the ways that those things were interconnected. We don't have to understand them, though. That's not the job, right? The job is just to send the reciprocity.
So if I can, let's actually talk about Health in Harmony, how it works, what it's doing all around the globe. So let's start at a high level. So
yeah,
as of right now, can you name, first of all, some of the places where Health in Harmony is operating and some of the things that have already been accomplished in terms of forest preservation and community health?
So when I started this 20 years ago, if you had told me that this is where we would be 20 years later, I would never have believed it. We're working in, we're working in Indonesia, but now we are partnering with the Ministry of Health to work across the entire country and to scale this program through the whole country. We are working in Madagascar. We are partnering, we have one region that's doing fabulously, which was sort of our test site, our initial startup site. And then we have another huge area that we're working in collaboration with Doctors Without Borders and also with a local NGO called Nitan and Seek, so that Health in Harmony isn't providing all those solutions. And then we are partnered with an amazing organization called Pawanka, which is an Indigenous led organization, a global organization, and we work all across Brazil now with them. We are working in 9 territories so far, Indigenous territories in Brazil, and we are planning on adding, well, as many more as we can get funding for this coming year, but a minimum of 3. And now we're working across the Democratic Republic of Congo as well. And I would say we're not working in nearly enough places. It is just beginning, and really all tropical forests they need global reciprocity. They need the world to recognize that one of the cheapest, most effective, best, and most powerful ways to provide thriving for the whole planet is to support a relatively small number of people who are the most powerful guardians of these forests. So, yeah.
And if people hear this message, Kinari, and they want to donate, where should they go?
Health in Harmony. So www.healthinharmony.org.
Yeah.
Yep. And you can partner with rainforest communities all over the world and send them some gratitude. I'll give you an example. So we're working on various ways of scaling. And one of the ways of scaling that we're working on is just send money directly to communities. We're not providing, initially it was sort of Health in Harmony or our affiliates in each one of these countries. In Indonesia, there's an organization called ASRI. It's 100% Indonesian staff. And in Madagascar, FAMI, again, mostly was one non-Malagasy person. And then in Brazil, of course, all Brazilians as well. It's called SAMA. So, and that's also for us as kind of an anti-colonial approach, that there's local control and local ownership of decision-making, especially because they're going to understand the context much better. And I would say that we're now just working with Pawanka to have this method where we just send money directly to communities. We're doing that in the DRC, and we work usually with some local partner organizations on the ground, though. They may be Indigenous associations that can sometimes help manage bank accounts and things like that. But I'll give you an example. So in the territory of Apeterewa in Brazil, they had first contact with outsiders 40 years ago. So we reached out. We decided that that this was a very important territory because it's a very large territory and it has the highest rate of deforestation of any territory in Brazil. And so we asked the communities through Pawanka what they would like for reciprocity. We only had $50,000, which we thought was not enough. It definitely would not have been enough for us to do the work ourselves. They said, thank you very much, but we don't really need that much money. We'll take $30,000. And the solutions that we want, we hear it's possible to monitor our territory with satellite imagery. We want satellite connection. We want computers. We want to be trained in how to monitor the satellite imagery to know when there are invaders. And we want to call in the authorities when that happens. First contact 40 years ago, right? it's amazing, and that is never the solution that I would have guessed, right? And now the second year they are like resiting communities, like villages along this arc of deforestation, and they like mapped out exactly where their villages should be, and they have these GPS units and drones, and they can go out. It's just like, okay, right?
I'm trying to imagine an American recipient saying, we only need 30,000. Keep the other 20.
And there we were like, oh, we don't have enough money. Is this going to be right? Yeah.
So opportunity, just real quick to brag here, Kinari. Give us an example or two of maybe some numbers of how successful some of the forest preservation efforts have been so far.
Yeah, so at our first site in Indonesia, we had a 90% drop in logging households over the first 10 years. If you compared our national park to other national parks, there was a 70% less loss of forest, of the primary forest, but that did not count the 52,000 acres of rainforest that grew back. Creating new corridors, we had camera traps, you could see the orangutans going through these new areas, and we had a 67% drop in infant mortality. And we, across the board, when we measured health and community well-being, every single indicator was improved. Well, that's not totally true. There were some indicators that I actually see as a improvement, but they were things like people were visiting the doctor more often for like upper respiratory infections, like coughs and things like that, right? Like used to be you'd never go to the doctor for that, but then later on, it's like that was when the serious things were all taken care of. Oh, now you can start sending your kids for things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think now is a good time to dig a little deeper into this concept of radical listening. And when I read your book, this really resonated deeply with me, both as a long-term meditator for where, radical awareness and radical attention is an explicit teaching, but also my doctorate was in something called human factors, which is all about empathetic design. So it was something that really hit home for me and the way you approached it. And of course, the page in the book that struck me was when you talked about hearing the sounds of chainsaws in the forest. And then, of course, like you said, you went through the why are they doing this, but you stuck on the word why, which is the word that an empathetic designer asks, right? Not what are these people doing, but why? And then continuing to pursue that why. And that takes you down this path that leads to the creation of this organization. So I'd love for you to just kind of walk us through how that concept developed.
Yeah, I would say I started off as a typical, white, colonial, obnoxious foreigner who had a bad attitude. But boy, that experience of really getting to know my Indonesian colleagues and to ask that question, what is going on here? What do I not understand? And then to really... that is, I spend my whole life. Why? It's not even, yes, I want to understand why. But you know what? It's also okay if I don't understand. It's okay if the answers require such a different worldview than I have. That's also okay, right? Like my job is to support, because we are all interconnected, and to get out of the way, right? That's the other thing, get out of the way. And just support local leadership, support communities who know exactly what the solutions are. And trust that I don't know. Trust that inner being. And one of the things that's been really amazing to me in listening around the world is that even across cultures we are so all human, right? It's like there's so much difference, but there's also so much similarity. And when you just approach with love and respect and skills, you really need some skills. That's why in the end we wrote a book, The Art of Radical Listening. Pat Plood was my wonderful co-author, and she's a teacher, and she was so helpful to me to be able to break down a lot of the skills of what it takes to listen. And and then I remember being really frustrated with her at one point, and I was like, yeah, all that's true, but it's all true. Fundamentally, it's just about love. She's like, I got it. We're going to start with inner being, right? As Thich Nhat Hanh calls it, right? That it's not we're all individuals like fingers sticking up when you cover it, but actually there's a poem connecting us all.
Yes. And so you alluded to it a little bit. So you went to Indonesia as an undergrad to study orangutans. And this process of getting to the locals actually inspired you to go back to medical school as a solution to this rainforest problem. So would you mind just kind of describing how that process went for you? Because that alone is an incredible story.
Well, for me, it was also a process of really coming to recognize my privilege in the world. That I had been born into the richest country in the world. That even though I didn't have the money to go to medical school, someone would lend me the money, right? The government, banks, they would lend it to me. And I would be able to pay it back. And that even that whole path was open to me. Friends I knew in the small villages in Kalimantan around Gunung Palung National Park, that was simply not a path open to them. They, in particular women, but also the men, just terrible grade school education, no access to middle school, no access to, high school or beyond. And I just really began to realize, okay, these communities see the solution for protecting the forest as access to healthcare. Among other things, there were other solutions as well. But that was a key solution. And we have found that throughout the world, that without access to healthcare, it's very hard to make long-term choices, right? If your child's going to die now, I would do the same, right? I don't want to protect the ecosystem around where I live, but if my child's going to die, So I decided that I should go to medical school and I should come back. I remember, interviewing, saying that's what I was going to do. And the dean of students, she told me later, she said, a lot of people come into medical school saying they're going to do things like that. She said, but I looked at you and I thought, there is something about her. She might just actually do it.
Something that really struck me about the book, Kinari, is that this art of radical listening is obviously like the linchpin that made Health and Harmony so successful, the effort so successful. But really the first 80 pages of the book is in many ways you kind of revealing this process or this art of radical listening within yourself. Like I've heard you describe that year in undergraduate school as like a year-long silent retreat. You're there, you're isolated. And I'm curious as to, like, has that always been part of your nature? That introspective, kind of deep thinking, striving for more self-awareness? Or was the forest the catalyst that kind of let those seeds germinate for you that then led to understanding how to apply it in community?
I think the forest was the catalyst. I think the forest worked on me. Maybe the wild in New Mexico too. I spent a lot of time in the wild when I was a child. But for sure, someone told me before I went to the forest that I would go through every memory I ever had. And I thought, that's impossible. After 2 weeks, I was like, shit, I think I've already gone through every single memory I've already had. It was like this sense of like, what am I going to think about now? And it was not a pleasant experience to go through every memory. It was painful and hard. You're alone all day, every day. You do not have a choice. You have to look at your own soul. You have to look at the big questions of the universe. You can try to avoid it, but you'll go crazy.
Yeah, I found it pretty fitting that you referred to it as a silent retreat, because reading about your experience in the forest exactly mirrored my first 10-day silent retreat in that sense. And I thought, I was feeling so much sympathy for young Kinari reading that part of the book. Like, oh, I know how that feels.
I feel lucky to have survived it in many senses. Not everyone did. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think those of us who've also spent, deep immersion time in nature can relate to that experience too. And it's one of the few times I've read it articulated really well in a book.
Yeah, the forest herself teaching me.
Mm-hmm.
And not just kindly. There's a sense of like the forest is like this, beautiful, we kind of romanticize nature, but it's intense, let's just say, right? One time there's the stories in the book, but just in a tiny reference, but this is another near-death experience. I do have lots of them. It seems to be God really wants to teach me many things. I was following an orangutan. The orangutan traveled much farther than they normally do, and my flashlight ran out. And I was trapped in the dark in the night in the forest, and the likelihood of surviving the night in the forest is low, right? I knew that. And yet, eventually, my eyes adjusted, and I remembered this thing and you can see it. All the forest floor is covered in this iridescent fungus. It looks like, phosphorescent fungus. It looks like starlight. And you get like all these constellations. But the path is pitch black. And so I followed this ribbon of pitch black, creeping along, trying to see where, and you're over logs, and made it home. But somehow for me, that's also been a metaphor for where we are right now on this planet. We're following the ribbon of pitch black, but we can make it.
Yeah, that experience must have been terrifying. And yeah, the experience of our collective wandering through the darkness is also terrifying, isn't it?
It's terrifying. And some of us aren't making it.
Yeah.
That being said, not to bypass it, but I think one of the really unique things about, at least in my experience with nature or wilderness, is that I fully agree with you, Kinari, that sometimes nature is not always delivering those lessons in a gentle way, but it has, like Mother Earth has such an uncanny ability to deliver it in the way that it can be received, you know? And so there's like a smoothness to some of my experiences. Sometimes the mind-body stuff for me has been abrupt, you know, like it's just a punch in the face. But, you know, if you're out in the boundary waters, yeah, you know, and being out, you know, in wilderness, like, you know, in the boundary waters, for example, or in the pitch black, you're like, okay, this is truly a life or death moment now. But somehow, I don't know, there's like this way that nature has supported me, at least, in dropping into those moments and being very present for them, where, you know, here in the city, sometimes it's easy to just escalate. And then we kind of lose touch with the body, we lose touch with the rational mind. So I think it's that wandering path in the darkness, I think, is something that is unique to this discovery process in nature. So it's interesting to hear you describe it that way.
You know, and many Indigenous communities know this very intimately, right? To go on walkabout, to do Sundance, right? To go fasting in the wilderness, right? These are thousands and thousands of years of learned experience of how to move, how to deepen who we are as human beings, right? And at the same time, like, go down deep, but also go out, recognize our inner connection, right? And that somehow there are known ways to do this, you know, and there are also plant medicines that many Indigenous cultures use. I've had the incredible privilege to get to work with ayahuasca in the rainforest in Brazil. And the Indigenous community, the Ashaninka, that I was doing radical listening with, I asked the elder, I said, I feel like before we work in the Amazon as Health and Harmony, we need to ask the forest herself for permission. And he was like, yes, you do. Here you go. Send me off upriver. Send me off into the wilderness. And yeah. And she told me, she said, it's not a question of whether or not you can work here. It's a question of how. The question is, if you do it the way you did it in Indonesia, with total love and respect and attention to every single piece, then exquisite beauty can happen. And she showed me this like beautiful thing coming down from the canopy, right? She said, but if even one piece is wrong, it will all collapse. And I think that is a lesson for us all in all of the work that we do, to be willing to go slow enough to make sure every piece is in alignment. And that when we get all the pieces in alignment, wow, that's like what both of you do, right? To make sure all the pieces are right. And when they're right, magic happens.
It is certainly what we attempt to do, and not without the assistance of occasional plant medicine, if I do say. But so I do not want to lose this thread. That is a beautiful story. I definitely don't want to lose the thread of you doing ayahuasca in the forest. What I do want to touch on real quick before we go completely down that road is to compare the approach you just described with that of your experience with the NGOs after the tsunami. One of the questions that Ian probably gets tired of hearing me ask on this podcast is, your solution makes so much sense. Why had nobody done it that way before? And it seems like the answer in your case has something to do with the way NGOs are organized.
It seems very obvious. You know, like people are like, oh, what is this magic radical listening? Right? I don't know why. I really don't know why. It's about hubris. It's about colonialism. It's about white supremacy. It's about racism. It's about a belief of separation and not interconnection. Yeah. And that when it's approached from that direction, from a direction of interconnection and respect and love and humility. And yeah, I have an MD, but that doesn't mean I have a clue what is going on here. And never could. You all are the experts. And I will say that sometimes and Pawanka serves this version as an Indigenous organization, and But having an outsider. Now, when I mean outsider, like it doesn't mean someone like in my role societally, right? It can mean someone from Antananarivo in the capital in Madagascar, who's then listening at a community in the south, right? Like that's an outsider. But having an outsider is also helpful. So we always pair up a local person and an outsider to listen. And the reason why an outsider can sometimes be helpful is because it encourages the group to frame things a little differently. They have to explain it to you because you're not going to get how things are here. And when they explain it to an outsider, it helps reflect for them to understand it themselves, right? Like a man in Madagascar once who said, well, you don't know this, but here our ancestors always said that there would be forest until the hens have teeth. In other words, kind of forever, right? But now we know that isn't true. Now we can see the end of the forest. We can see that it's not very many years away. And so like in reflecting that there's sort of kind of like this ancestral wisdom, but it actually isn't right anymore. The community could then begin to wrestle with how are we going to preserve the forest, which provides our water, and have enough food to eat so that we're not afraid of the hunger season, so that our children are not dying of diseases, right? So that we have health care, we have livelihoods, we have enough food to eat, and they propose these solutions which went from 1 crop of rice to 3 crops of rice a year, right? They went from people dying of malaria just like all the time to women taking birth control because, hey, we're feeling like their kids were going to survive. Like women becoming leaders, right? Like replanting the forest and like all of this just like positive generative spiral. Just things keep getting better and better and better. And it's all because they're designing their own solutions. And it's stunning to me in so many places in the world, people know exactly what solution it is they want. We want this variety of rice. We want this type of training. And then when we do those training, like almost the entire population shows up because it's exactly what they asked for.
So these threads started with this notion of radical listening. As a through line to this solution set, I'm curious if we can go back to you being upriver and you getting instruction or guidance from the forest herself. So this visual of these threads dropping from the canopy, right? And the message of, but if one of them's wrong, the whole thing will collapse. To me, when I hear this phrase radical listening, at the surface, it could just sound like another buzzword or phrase. But what I hear and what I'm sensing from you is like it's really this full-bodied listening. And so, when you were getting that message in the forest, like what insights were coming to you about how to listen in that place? And then what are some of these common threads that you feel like others who are just being introduced to this term radical listening should be aware of?
It's so interesting to me because like in Madagascar and in Brazil and the DRC, we've heard this over and over again. No one has ever listened to us, right? No one has ever, but then the radical part of the radical listening is you then do what the community says. You actually get the resources to make sure that those solutions can be implemented. Why were those solutions not implemented already? Because they didn't have the resources to make them happen. If they did, they would have already made them happen. So it's like this global partnership that is necessary to bring those solutions to fruition, to that the local expertise, but then because of many different global factors, resources are not available to them. So we're not talking huge amounts of money, right? It's really possible to bring about dramatic change with small amounts of money. And at our first site in Indonesia, we invested $5 million over 10 years, but $2 million of that was to build a long-term facility. So really we invested $3 million over 10 years. Just in carbon, just in the value of the carbon, which I hate to value the forest and the carbon. Because it's like, I talked to her. She's not about carbon, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
She's like an entity, right? But $65 million worth of carbon, in the way that Western markets value that carbon. So a 12 times return on investment by just investing in communities. Because they're the best guardians of these forests. Whether that's protecting them from outsiders or protecting it from themselves because they don't have any other choice, right?
So if people are listening, this is the first time they're hearing about health and harmony and this approach to partnership between the rich world and the communities on the front lines of these forests. They have to be asking themselves, this is amazing. What does it take to scale this? What is stopping this from happening everywhere? So what is stopping this from happening everywhere?
Money.
Okay.
We just have to have enough people willing to share their gratitude and love and say, hey, thanks, heart and lungs. I really appreciate it for keeping me alive. And thank you, rainforest communities, for protecting that heart and lungs. Right? We're in this together. I really appreciate that. Let's go do it.
Yep. So when I hear these stories, I just think to myself, there is so much rich world money that flows into philanthropy. And there are so many even organizations that talk, about the measured altruism type folks who are saying what is the absolute best value for your charitable dollar? How do all of those people, how do all of those people not just say, give everything to health and harmony? What is it going to take for that to happen?
Well, okay, there's a few things. One, we're not that well known, so spread the word.
We're doing our best right now.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to both of you. And if anyone who is hearing this podcast, please tell someone, we do not have to choose between human well-being and environmental well-being, right? That is the fundamental lie that locks people into, and this belief in we just have to invest in some kind of technology or something and there's some kind of one widget that will fix it. No, the widget is listen and then fund those specific local solutions. Everywhere the solution is different. Although there are themes, healthcare, livelihoods, education, those are themes that run, right? But the specific details are different in every place. So spread the word. Please spread the word. Tell others we don't have to choose. We can all thrive. Let's thrive.
So these indigenous communities, they always know, right? And that was one of the things that I just found. It was a theme that just kept showing up, right? In your talks and your books. But the other side of the coin, right, in terms of what is stopping us from scaling, funding. But also what I heard you say was that part of what's blocking the funding is the narrative around this zero-sum game between humans and nature.
That's right.
And so, again, maybe for the person who hasn't had the wilderness experience, right, who hasn't thought deeply about the, $5 chicken that they can buy at Costco and how ridiculously cheap that is and all of the subsidies that went into it, but the entire process of following that chicken all the way back right to the farm. Or have you seen some effective ways of getting people from the West who haven't necessarily been brought up with this understanding of interdependence to get it and to get it quickly?
No.
I wondered if you were going to say the experience itself. But
Well, okay, I will say. All right, now this is now I'm getting into dangerous territory. The one experience I will say that does often get people to get it is a psychedelic experience.
Reading my mind.
That is otherwise, indigenous people do know, right? There are many ways to get to this, what we call an expanded state of consciousness, right? Fasting, meditation, long silent retreats, time in wilderness, right? All of those things do help. They take a lot of time,
Yep.
right? That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing, right? But they are a commitment. And they're not easy. They are very fruitful, but they are not easy. And psychedelics are not easy either, because you may have to face your own shadow, but they are fast and profound. And they have certainly, I have had experiences that have you just know the oneness of it all. You just know it right away. You can't unknow it too once you've known it.
Yep, I completely agree. And the analogy I have given a lot of people is, the slow expansionary processes like long-term mind-body practice or time in nature is slowly walking up a mountain. Every few days you can look down and say, ooh, wow, this is quite a perspective up here every couple of days. And it's a controlled ascent. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Taking psychedelics is like strapping a rocket to your back and hoping you land somewhere okay.
But it might be at the top of the mountain.
You're going to land up there somewhere, but it's going to be the ride up. It might be a little intense. Is that where you were hoping to go there, Ian?
Well, it certainly wasn't not on my mind, as someone who has had plant medicine experiences and also as someone who says, 10 years in recovery. I think it's a very nuanced conversation that we're having, right? And I think that if I can jump back a chapter or two in the conversation regarding my questions around, Kinari's own experiences with deep listening to self that first year in the forest, if I could just add one thing to this conversation, the foundation with which one goes into a plant medicine experience is extremely important. And I just don't think that, not that we are, but I don't think that we can talk about these things lightly. We need to, or with a heavy hand rather, we should be talking about them lightly. We should be treading in these forests lightly. Absolutely a tool in the tool belt. And I'm an advocate of it in myself and have experiences myself, but it's one thing to, as Kinari said, right? We're wading into deeper waters here, and we're having a larger macro conversation around cultural impact, right, and environmental impact. And so the role that plant medicines play in cultural impact is obviously one that's important and needs to be respected and revered.
Yeah. For example, I would only do ayahuasca under the invitation of a local community leader whose idea it was, and who then sent me to the forest to do it. Right? Like that's a culturally respectful way to treat a medicine that, and I'm not saying necessarily that it shouldn't have a global role, but there's an important honoring of Indigenous wisdom and the knowing of where this medicine comes from, its own rootedness.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You went into that with reverence, right? That question of, I feel like I need to ask the forest for permission, whether we can work here. That's a reverence going into it, not a recreational use case.
Yep. It's a question rooted in humility, and it's a ceremony that is structured and contextual, etc. And as you've said, right, Kinari, the modern Western mind often lives in a universe of separation and fragmentation, and a lot of these plant medicines are not born in such a context and do not function the same in a context of separateness.
There's some idea that my book I might actually we're working on. It might be like a TV series kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And I was thinking about the opening shot, and I'm thinking about like being in the boat going into the forest, being in a canoe, leaning over the edge and like looking into the water. And that sense of like that reflection. That's what many Westerners are doing. They are just looking into themselves, right? And it's what I was doing, right? But then I'm like looking up and I'm seeing the forest, not only reflected in the water, but also like right there, right? And then realizing it is those local community members paddling this boat who are keeping all of us alive. That's where we are. It is like that arc. And also I would include that arc of like the sky and the sun and the like, we are this divine within us all and keeping us all alive. And this just, it's that image of how we are all interconnected. And it's not just about looking in the water at ourselves.
Right, yeah. And for us in the West, sometimes we don't know where else to start. And,
Yeah.
It's
not to say it's not part of the arc, right?
Right, yeah.
But it's not the only part of the arc.
I mean, to shift from a foundational understanding of the world and an interdependence to, in the West, very reductionistic, it makes sense why we make this psychological leap. But I think one thing that really hit me from Guardians of the Trees, and you brought it up earlier, is the framing of the exchange as reciprocity. And that suggests interdependence. Whereas I think a lot of people, or at least here in the West, the narrative around climate is transactional. Yeah. We need to draw down carbon. It's like in a math equation.
Yeah, pay for it. I'm gonna
exactly.
It's got a dollar value on it.
Exactly, valuing carbon, right?
Which I do not agree with. Even though I did give you some numbers, but I don't agree with them.
It takes it out of the context, And you've just done such an amazing job, and again, to harken back to the radical listening of you allow the context to dictate the solution set. And in the West, I think that the reductionistic mindset is to try and find a variable to tweak rather than to understand the context as a whole.
Reciprocity, it's an Indigenous concept, right? It's about the earth gives to me, I give back to the earth. And it's not like theoretical, right? It's like this plant gives to me, I give it some compost, right? I'm doing a pruning. I'm like, this is like, I'm in relationship with this plant. And I am in relationship with this person, right? They're giving to me, I'm giving back to them. And when they give me an even bigger gift, and then I give them an even bigger gift. And that's the same with nature, right? The more you give, the more you get back. It's like, the concept of reciprocity is not a one for one. It's a like stepladder. More and more is possible.
Yeah, there's an Aboriginal notion of just the word is increase. It's very different than the concept of like GDP growth. Like you said, it's about reciprocal benefit leading to expanding symbiosis.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's it's an Indigenous concept because we've gotten so far from it, we've just forgotten it. but anyone who lives in relationship with the earth has no choice but to learn that. It's practical survival.
That's right.
Yeah. So I'm going to do that thing, Ian. I'm going to pivot us back to the ground a little bit, but it's all going to connect, I promise. So one of the reasons we like to have guests like you, Kinari, is because we have a lot of other mission-driven founders and mission-driven leaders who listen to this and are in our community of clients and friends. And all of them struggle on some level with this idea of connecting this broader mission, this broader sense of healing a relationship to the earth, creating better well-being, to and merging that and functioning within the world of business, which, like it or not, is functioning in capitalistic terms. And one of the things that I've appreciated about you every step of the way is how you are bringing those two things together. You are bringing your whole self into this space. And it shows up just in your book. It's such a rare book in that it is a deeply personal account of coming of age, coming into a spiritual path, and also the story of founding a business. And one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, how did you get to the point where you decided you were going to share such a deeply personal story and also your founder's story together?
Well, I started with my founder story. Or not even my founder story, not even about me. I just started writing about the work, right? It didn't make any sense. It was like, where did that come from, right? Well, you only get that if I understood this. So then I just began to realize, I can't write this. And then if I'm not willing to be honest about what it actually took and how I got here and all the mistakes I made, right? And then, I think many people who write a book will say this too. It's not really, it came through me. And I just felt like it's time for us to be honest and to know that there is no separation here. So I can't tell a story of no separation and then act like I'm separate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I think it's really inspiring for all of us to see you tell such a complete story and be so vulnerable. And if it's okay with you, I didn't tell you I was going to do this before. Can I read a little piece of your book that I really love?
Sure.
Okay.
It's a strange question, isn't it, Kinari? I've been asking myself.
Well, some of them are kind of vulnerable. So yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so it's something I personally identified with. And I think there are founders listening who can at least identify with the struggle. So it's at the part in the book where you have the dream. So if I can fill the listeners in, I believe this is when you're in recovery from the big jellyfish sting, going through a multi-year near-death experience. And you're also contemplating what is the future of health and harmony, right? Does it need to go from being this one intervention to becoming a global organization, and you're wrestling with that. And then you have this dream where you're fighting this, I would say, this multi-tiered land war, right? Kind of experiencing the metaphor of this battle.
Yeah.
Between, saving certain parts of the earth and the forces of capitalism that may be working against you. And someone tells you to go see this woman named Ida Rezi. Am I saying her name correctly?
Ida Rezi, yeah.
Yes. And can you just briefly describe who she is?
Oh, goodness, brief.
Okay.
A woman who had an experience of the divine so profound that she became a high priestess without studying one iota because all of the information was just given to her. She is a dear friend, an amazing human being. She's a gift to the planet.
Yes. And so you go to see her, and your plan was to tell her about your dream and ask her for advice. And if I recall, you're basically looking for, how do I interpret this dream and what does this mean for my future and for the work? And so she stops you and she says, I have a message for you. And I think this will resonate with a lot of people. And she says, you've been chosen. You've been chosen to help heal the earth. You have a message you have to give to the world. Your heart already has much wisdom and strength, but your mind is stronger, and it is fighting with your heart. Your mind is blocking your acceptance and surrender. When your heart and your mind become one, and the wisdom flows from your mouth, then you will have pure peace. And that's the first time I've read that without crying.
I'm crying.
Yeah, that's what it's done to me 4 or 5 times. And I think all of us who feel that call inside of us struggle with that heart and mind battle every day.
Yeah.
And it's the condition of being called in this time and place. To feel somewhat out of place, to feel like you're fighting an incredibly uphill battle, and to at times resist that call and wonder if it's really worth all the pain and struggle. Now I'm getting emotional, damn it.
You know why I feel also so emotional at this moment? Because I realize I have gotten to the point in my life where I feel that peace. Like just even in this podcast, that I can tell all the parts of it, right? That my mind and my heart are not fighting.
Yeah, and it shows, Kinari. It shows. I've been on both sides of that conversation and often am every day. So
it shows in both of you too. You are also there. I hope you feel the peace.
Some days. Some days more than others, as you well know.
I will.
Yeah. So,
and I hope every single person hearing this knows your calling, knows that you too have been chosen. We have all been chosen. This is the most important time in human history. This moment. This is the moment when we decide whether or not there will be a future.
Yeah. To be on the brink of the sixth mass extinction and to know that it's been brought about by our own hand, and to toss some numbers back in the equation around, if the odds of becoming a human are 400 trillion to 1, what are the odds that we're here, that you're here now in like this generation? Yeah. This century is the turning point.
It's the turning point.
And it's a wild opportunity. And it's intimidating as hell, but it's a wild opportunity.
And we don't have to, there's not a single one of us that have to do it all. That's not possible. That's a false story. The story is we do it all together. We each have our own part.
So we have these handful of questions that we like to end every podcast with, and at this point, it may seem a little bit pedestrian, but I think we can pull it off. And what we do is we like to give our guest the opportunity to speak directly to the audience and ask for whatever support you need. And so we usually do it two ways. One is, what would be the highest leverage system level change that would help the cause of forest preservation?
Honestly, break the lie. Break the lie that you have to choose. This is not about choosing humans over the earth, over ecosystems. And this is about we need us all. And if we really understood that reciprocity, we could live like Indigenous communities in the sense of knowing our oneness and have a world that has a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful future, right? Where we have tens of thousands of years of stability and flourishing. That's possible. There is well and enough on this planet for us all to flourish. We just have to have a different view of it. So break the lie, share the podcast, share this story, help people understand that you don't have to choose. You can read my books, read Guardians of the Trees and The Art of Radical Listening. And if you know of an organization or are a member of an organization that you think radical listening would be beneficial to you, I will also tell you it is incredibly beneficial in working within your own organization. So we use it as well to listen to our staff. What are we missing? And the collective wisdom that arises is always very, very, very helpful. Right? I always say about radical listening, it's not like every single person knows the answer. None of us know the answer. It is only collectively that we know an answer. And we can work off each other and this point and this, but if there we go, that's it, right? And these magical moments where everyone gets it, that there's a good solution. So yeah, those are the things I would say. Oh, and of course, please send reciprocity to rainforest communities.
And again, where should people send that reciprocity?
healthandharmony.org. In harmony, just to be clear. Health in harmony. Like health in harmony with nature. Yeah.
Ian, any final questions from you?
No. Kinari landed the plane for us, as she is doing for so many of us. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you both. Thank you for all the work you're doing in the world.
Thank you, and thank you for coming on The Turning Point today, Dr. Webb. Huge thanks to Dr. Kinari Webb for being our guest today. You can learn more about her and her incredible work with Health in Harmony at healthandharmony.org. And if you're a mission-driven leader looking to grow your impact, you can check us out at stillpointinsight.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time on The Turning Point Podcast.